So welcome back to the 2022 Global Forest Summit taking place in Brussels, co-organized by the Open Diplomacy Institute and Reforest'Action. I'm very happy to host you again for a more philosophical conversation we will have about nature and humanity. We were hoping to take the chance of this conversation to host Dr. Tony Juniper, former director at the global stage of the Friends of Earth. Unfortunately, Dr. Juniper is ill because of COVID, and we have had the chance to keep our other speakers with us and have this 30-minute discussion. And I'm therefore introducing them to you watching us from many, many different countries, from Kenya to Gabon, from Indonesia to Peru, from the US to the Philippines, and you will have the chance to host with me on my left, Nicolas Blain, Director for Institutional Relations at Reforest'Action. Thank you, Nicolas, for being with us this afternoon. I also have the pleasure to welcome in the conversation Professor Laurence Monnoyer-Smith, Chief Sustainability Officer at the Center for National Space Studies in France. Laurence, you've also been High Commissioner for Sustainable Development in France, as well as Vice President of the National Commission for Public Debate. You're a political scientist. Welcome, and I do hope you hear us correctly. I'm also happy to say that you're a board member of the Open Diplomacy Institute as well, and I do warmly welcome Dr. Robert Nassy, Director General of CIFOR, Managing Director of CIFOR ICRAF, and therefore leader of the Global Landscape Forum, who is a kind support to the Global Forest Summit. And Robert is also a proud member of the advisory board of the Global Forest Summit, steering us into the right direction. Thank you, Robert, for being with us. You're in Indonesia. It must be quite late for you already. So thanks to three of you for being with us. And I'll start with this first question to Robert. In asking about this responsibility that humanity has in the major degradation of ecosystems that we face. This is what the anthropocene means. I'd like to ask you how deep the problem is and how we can assess this. Can you help us to grasp the magnitude of this problem in forest ecosystems and in our role as human beings in causing the problems?
If we don't do anything, we are likely to face the same fate as the former civilization. So we are going to disappear as a civilization. On average, the lifespan of a civilization is about 350 years. If you think ours started at the end of the Industrial Revolution, we are not far from the preemption date if you don't do anything. And in terms of scale of the issue, I mean, we are losing 12 million hectares of land to degradation every year. That costs $6.3 trillion to the economy. We are wasting 10% of the global GDP on land degradation. We are still losing about 10 to 12 million hectares of tropical forest every year. The positive trend that we had seen in temperate forest with an increase on forest cover has been reversed now. Because of climate change, because of pest, disease, wildfire that become more and more catastrophic. Same in the boreal, in the taiga, which is the largest forest, where we have a huge fire and at the same time the thawing of the permafrost that is potential time bomb. So the situation is not very good, and we are, I would say, 100% responsible for it. I mean, there has been a climatic variation on Earth previously. This one is our own responsibility, and it is affecting everything. I mean, you find more plastic than fish in some place of the ocean. You find, you see now these days, I mean, the temperature in the two poles is 50 degrees higher than what it should be on the normal. So we are responsible for it. We need to do something. It's probably not too late, but we have to be quick about it.
So we fully understand the magnitude of of this problem, and you've been clear-cut, 100% responsibility of mankind and humanity in this issue. But the awareness of this responsibility is not so clear to everyone. And therefore, I'm turning to Laurence, because as the French Commissioner General for Sustainable Development, you've led actually the conception of the roadmap for the 2030 goals of the UN. And in doing so, you've been in charge of consulting the public to combine environmental concerns with socio-economic interests. And in doing so, you've often seen that citizens do not envision our relationship with nature in the same way. And I'd like you to explain us the different political stances that you've observed and options you've seen in this period of time in your career.
Yes, I think what Dr. Nazi just said is actually a very good illustration of what I've witnessed in the discussion I've had and the different debates I've had in France. The vision we have is a very anthropocentric one. It means that we do not see any limits to our actions. And this goes back to a long time in the way we perceive our relations with nature, meaning that this anthropocentric vision plus our liberal conception of our action, our activities, our economy, mainly lead the people and citizens to not being really able to envision some kind of limitations of their everyday consumption and practices. And it goes back to a very long way. Because we have this conception that we are superior, we are more intelligent, and we have proven in some ways that we are, even if we can discuss what intelligent is. But pretty much we consider ourselves as the master of the earth, and somehow it goes back to the conception that we can have in one interpretation of the Bible. So it's something which is very anchored, very deep, in the way we behave and we envision our role on this planet. So we are responsible for this planet, but not completely responsible, and that's why we degraded it. But we consider ourselves as so powerful that we can always fight or find a solution, a technical solution or a scientific solution to the various degradation we have made. The only problem is that these degradation have increased enormously in the last, let's say, century, and the figures we've just heard are a complete symptom of that. So we have this very anthropocentric vision that we have a very hard time to envision relation with nature that is not based on reciprocity, and the liberal perception we have in our economic system put us in such a situation that we don't really understand that the planet is giving us as well a lot of services that we call ecosystemic services, and we have a hard time to apprehend it, to understand that we benefit of it, and that it is not free, because we put in our economic model, we don't calculate it, we don't put a price on it. So I've seen that basically we consider that we can take the air, we can take the water, we can take resources, raw materials from the planet, and all this we put in our economic system in such a way that we don't calculate its own value. So to be completely fair, this is evolving. Otherwise, it will be a complete, catastrophe, or even it will be in a real desperation. But so it has evolved as we have for the last 10, 15 years started to calculate what the planet is giving us through these economic services, pollination, for example, the services it gives back to agriculture. And we know now how expensive it would be not to have these economic services. We have humid zones that help us to clean the water, to clean the soils, etc., etc. So all these ecosystemic services puts us or make us realize that we are in a very dependent relation with nature. But to be honest, not everyone has that into. I mean, the companies don't. All the companies or the political, the citizens or all the government don't necessarily realize all that, and the very short gain they can have by exploiting the resources, the natural resources, is always taking the advantage compared to the long run of being the long term of the cost it will be if we don't preserve it.
Yeah, you've clearly outlined this, what I would call ontological overconfidence of humanity above nature in not taking into account this ecosystem services. We were just having a conversation about the UK COP26 before, and the British people do say there is no free lunch and there is no free ecosystem services in there. That's bringing me to Nicolas Blain, because Reforest'Action is precisely a B Corp company that historically is specialized in crowd planting, because you do believe that there is among people a motivation to protect and restore nature and to sustain the idea that we have to pay for these ecosystem services indeed. Does this make you more optimistic than Robert and Laurence have been in facing the collapse we may be at the edge of?
Well, thank you, Thomas. How to keep hope when we see the figures that Robert mentioned, when we see the twin crises of climate and biodiversity we are facing, and the threats of the next century horizon. This is a key question. I think those environmental challenges must be reason to accelerate the shift. For sure, there is destruction of the Amazonian forest, which is nearing a tipping point that could transform it into a savanna. For sure, there are still lots and too much harmful subsidies that fuels deforestation. But those reasons could be reasons of discouragement, of despair. But I think we really need to take those reasons as reasons not to get tired, but to really accelerate the shift and to go on, to move forward. There are positive signals. Look at the world currently. The civil society is multiplying currently climate trials. The rights of nature are progressing all around the world. Recently, Panama and Chile recognized the rights of nature in their own legal system a few days ago. Ecocide is also slowly but progressing throughout the world. And there were positive signals last year in 2021. The launching of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the EU law on deforestation that is currently discussed. So those positive signals are truly not enough, but we need to ground on it so as to accelerate the transition. So this is an assessment, but beyond that, I really do consider that action gives hopes. Let's remember Wangari Maathai, a Nobel Peace Prize. What did she say? Planting trees is planting hope. So at Reforest'Action, we are fueled by action. We were 2 people in 2013, and now we are more than 60 people working in 40 countries with hundreds of stakeholders. And to me, yes, being in action is definitely a motivation to act faster. And I would add that beyond acting, cooperating is a virtual and a virtuous circle. It means that we mutually inspire each other with our stakeholders. So when Kennedy said a few decades ago, "I want a man on the moon," in a few years afterwards, man went on the moon. So it's where there's a will, there's a way. We need to move forward together and to keep hope, tremendously keeping hope. And perhaps a few last things. Collective action is a fantastic fuel to move forward. States must reinforce laws. NGOs must continue to advocate. Journalists, civil society, forester, indigenous tribes, all together, we need to cooperate more and more to go beyond. This is the sense of the 17 NDGs. And beyond that, beyond collective action, if I could add something, would be after decades of environmental commitment for the planet, I really, really feel in my inner that beyond action, we need an inner shift. It means you can plant all the trees you want on the world, you can install all the solar panels you want around the world. If you don't recognize to your inner so as to recognize to nature, we won't succeed this transition. And a last word, how to shift in our inner. We need, as Laurence said, we need to shift from an anthropocentric approach of the world to an ecocentric. And we also need to re-envision the way we define and we see happiness. If happiness still remains a materialistic happiness and a consumerism happiness, we will fail. We need to shift towards a more inner happiness by practicing more sport, more social relations, and perhaps also more inner activities like meditation or yoga.
Yeah, well, that's a wonderful advertisement for yoga treatments all around the world, including in those countries which are part of this group. But it's funny you mentioned the way we've been capable of getting to the moon in a few years because there was a will to get to that way. That resonates a lot with Laurence's job to send satellites in space and making sure we can keep observing in details how deforestation is progressing across the globe, because we need to keep and not to turn a blind eye on what is happening. Because indeed, humanity needs to face with itself, and I'm turning back to Robert about this. We, humanity, are the roots of the problem to other species and to nature. It's the way we have set up our societies and economy that brought us to this tipping point that Nicolas just touched upon. Do you think that this is due to wrong posture of human beings in the living? Is there a chance that the Homo economicus market makes a change according to you, or have you lost faith yourself in humanity? That's a bit tough for a question.
Yeah, I mean, you are presenting me like the sort of the doomsayer. I mean, I have to put a caveat first. I am an unflinching optimist, because otherwise, I mean, there's no way that it doesn't mean that even being optimistic, I mean, you can see what is happening around you. And I think our problem is that we forgot the second part of our name. As a species, we are Homo sapiens, not Homo economicus. Unfortunately, the sapiens element has a bit disappeared somewhat. So we are a species able to put a rocket on the moon in a couple of years to have a mobilization extraordinary to save the banks during a crash. We spend $1,300 billion, which is a mind-boggling number, in military equipment so that we can kill each other happily. And at the same time, we have difficulties to find $100 billion a year to fight climate change. That is going to make us disappear happily also if we don't do anything. Well, I think it's really a matter of priority. I mean, it's sort of, as long as we will spend more money in pet food than in fighting climate change, we have not put our priority right. And that's it. And I think it relates to what Laurence says, that our belief that we have something special. We don't. We are not. I mean, it's sort of Mother Earth doesn't care about us. And when people say that that's the end of the world, no, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's going to be the end of the civilization as we know it. The Earth will subside. There will be more animals, different species, and long after we have disappeared. And so if we want to maintain our place and as a civilization or as humans, then we need to do something, and we need to look at a different way of considering nature. Nature is not a benign being. It's more like a wrathful titan. The amount of energy that Earth receives every day from the sun is equivalent to 1 billion atomic bomb. this energy is channeled through fluxes, through photosynthesis, to jet stream, to oceanic currents. And what we have done, and these things look like one of the things that Lawrence does, I mean, it's this big jet engine that put a rocket in the moon, which are kilometers of pipe and very heated combustion and all this. And then someone threw a wrench into this engine, and then something wrong happened. And I think what we have done, we threw a wrench into the Earth engine and they start to collapse. And then you see tipping points happening. You see the Amazon going into savanna, potentially. You see the risk of having oceanic currents. This is monumental. I mean, sort of when this will happen, that will be too late and we will not be able. So we need to react first and to realize first that we are not trying to save Earth, we are trying to save ourselves.
In putting together those military figures in front of the money we invest in protecting nature, you've touched a point that is, I would say, timely, desperately timely, because we're in Brussels today as well as the NATO summit that needs to deal with the Ukraine invasion by Russia, and it reminds us that we need to strike a balance between our objectives of sustainability and the geopolitical context. That's been part of the discussion because our way to solve this problem is indeed in this context, which is again sounds like madness. So this is the reason why we have this philosophical reasoning and discussion today. Turning back to Laurence Monnoyer-Smith, you've been researching philosophical paradigms that enables us to, I would say, move into the right direction when you had to write and consult to draft the France's roadmap for the 2030 agenda of the UN, the SDGs. It sounds like humanity is not capable of conceiving itself as part of nature, but above nature, which prevents us from advancing on at least SDG 14, 15, 16, obviously. Is there a philosophical paradigm you've researched that paves the way for something, I would say, more sustainable, or at least more aligned with what Nicolas and Robert just said?
Well, there are many discussions about actually among the philosophical community about what kind of paradigm should we think ourselves in, being part of the nature, being one species among other species, just like Robert said. And that's actually there are various way of envisioning how we are. I mean, what kind of animal are we in part of this ecosystem? How are we different? What kind of how much different we are, and those differences have led us to be extremely arrogant in the history. And I think the example you've just gave about us being able to send a rocket or a spaceship in the moon, one has to remember that when we did that, we didn't do it for a scientific purpose. We did do it because of the geopolitical situation at that time, and because we wanted to be the strongest. And this has been called the conquest of space. It hasn't been entitled the exploration of space or the pioneers in space. It has been called the conquest of space. So for me, it's not really a good example of what we could do in connection with our own nature. And that's why I don't really like to use this expression anymore, because I think the relation we have with our planet and with space is still very much anchored into this arrogant paradigm of all-powerful mankind, and still is. But I don't want to be too pessimistic, because there is, as you said, Thomas, there is this philosophical trend now, which is gaining more and more power, or trying to convince more citizens that we are part of this ecosystem. We are one animal into this nature, and this changes the relationship, or this look, or this relationship we have with other animals, or for example, to understand how we can cooperate, as you said before, how we can define the right place for us, meaning that we have to preserve some space for us for our own activities, but this space can also be shared in the right fashion if we make the effort. And for this, we have very good example from previous civilization that have a complete different cosmogony as we do have, and even ancient civilization, but also some other conception of relationship between human and nature that exists nowadays in other population. I've been always very stressed. I've been struck when I was in Canada a few years ago during public debate about the exploitation of gas and schist gas, and the way they organize public debates with local population in Canada, and the way they listened to this population explaining how Mother Earth, that's how they express themselves during public debate with the government, how Mother Earth provide them with very important services, and how we have to respect these services, understand how it works, and be respectful with Mother Earth. And I think we have so much to learn from this conception of the world, and that would be a very good, for us, a very good exercise to be a lot less arrogant and to open ourselves to this new conception of mankind among other species, like being part of the whole system.
Thank you so much, Laurence, in remembering the importance of this language that is not often used in diplomatic events or summits like this. Mother Earth is indeed another language, and I'm sure we will hear it from the different indigenous leaders who will join us later on in the day. We have already mentioned some of them in the introduction of the summit. I have a last question for Nicolas about this, the way we can translate this philosophical conversation into applicable economic decisions, as we need to re-articulate our relationship with nature. You've been co-developing a social business trying to address the environmental collapse risk for years now. Many cynical, so maybe desperate human beings says, with a critical mindset, that making money from nature and from horror at the same time is probably the wrong way. So I'm asking this: can we grow a company with a cause? Is this a way that we, as a certain Homo sapiens and Homo economicus at the same time, can move forward?
Well, thank you again, Thomas. This is a tough question. I've been working for years with in NGOs at the United Nations, with the indigenous tribes, and this is a key question. Is it possible to reconnect economy and nature? Well, the thing is, the question today, can we continue developing an economy that destroys nature? For sure, we all say the answer is no. We need a paradigm shift. The economy today must adapt to the laws and to the rhythm of nature, and not the contrary. So this could be possible to adapt our economy to the laws and the rhythm of nature via circular bioeconomy. But this paradigm shifts that must lead action need to be grounded on ethics. I was mentioning the rights of nature. It means it's a complete shift in our brain, like the human rights centuries ago have been, to recognize rights to ecosystem like forests. This is a great progress. The Earth jurisprudence, which is another very interesting concept developed by Thomas Berry, meaning that each member of the community of the living world has a positive role to play in favor of the Earth community. The Earth jurisprudence is currently progressing into the United Nations arena. And beyond that, I think we need to really recognize the intrinsic value, a concept that may speak to Laurence, the intrinsic value of ecosystem. We no longer need to protect and restore nature for their own benefits towards human beings, but before and the first because of their own right to exist, their own intrinsic value. So this is the ground, the ethic grounding of the action that must be pushed on the core of our action. Beyond that, to be concrete as well, because this is an equation, action for forest, for environment needs money. For example, for forest restoration and protection, we need $700 billion by 2050. This is a huge amount of money. Could this money be gathered only by the public sector? No, we need a cooperation between private and public sector, as the 17 NDG calls for partnerships. So businesses must be part of the solution for two reasons. First, because they have a huge responsibility in the environmental crisis, and second, because they have a great interest as well to protect nature. There's no thriving economy on a dead or on a sick planet. And just to conclude, how entrepreneurship can reconnect the dot with nature. I think after being in Africa, in Haiti, local people, they want to develop their own business, sustainable economic models to empower by their own so as to be able to thrive for further generations. And currently, we need and we see a growing ecopreneurs generations. The WRI, the FAO, the IUCN, the UNEP are creating and developing an accelerator lab for local entrepreneurs to give them means to develop their own business. And to conclude in a nutshell, that's what we aim as well to do at Reforest'Action. Stéphane Haller, our CEO, aims to create generation of reforestation entrepreneurs that would be able to implement locally circular bioeconomy.
Thanks, Nicolas. That's the way we want to build our future, or at least that's the way we can, because we are just humans. And we need to be as modest as this. You've been all clear, the three of you, about the danger of overconfidence or arrogance of humanity in building its relationship with nature, in nature. I'd like to thank the three of you for this discussion that puts everything into perspective. I would like specifically to thank Robert for being with us as one of the members of the advisory board of the Global Forest Summit. Thank you, Robert, for not only for being part today of the discussion, but also for advising us along the year and making sure this event is meaningful. I warmly thank the three of you and wish you a good day wherever you are. Probably a good night from Indonesian colleagues. And in wrapping up, just recording all our public that you can ask questions all the day through in flashing this QR code and sending messages so that we can direct your questions to different speakers. Don't bother whether it's relevant or not. At some point we will use this question and we have time to ask them to speakers if they are online and available. We will meet anyway for the second session of the 2022 Global Forest Summit at 2 p.m. CET on the road to Stockholm Plus 50, shifting towards circular economies with forest. That's the theme of our next session. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you very much from Brussels.